Good late afternoon, members and audiences from far-flung places. If you are listening or watching the first Siam Society Zoom lecture this evening, welcome. I hope you can hear me and you can see the screen. Will come up in a moment. Now, let me introduce the speakers this evening. It will be Dr. Chris Baker and Dr. Pasuk Phongpaichit. Dr. Chris Baker and Dr. Phongpaichit actually needs no introduction. You probably have listened to their or attended their lectures many times before or have read their many books in the recent years. Now, first of all, congratulations, Dr. Chris Baker, for for being nominated as the honorary, as elected honorary member to the Siam Society today. Now, this evening, Dr. Chris Baker will talk about the coming of the Wat Mural in late Ayutthaya. A few years ago, both Dr. Chris and Dr. Pasuk wrote a book, a fairly new book called A History of Ayutthaya. Also, Dr. Chris Baker have won the Phongpaichit Grand Prize in 2017, this precious prize. Now, Dr. Chris, I can't see you on the screen, but I think you're ready. So if you're ready, we will start. Thank you very much and welcome Dr. Chris Baker and Dr. Pasuk Phongpaichit. Thank you very much for doing this for the Siam Society.
Okay, well, I can start talking. Thank you, Tom, very much for this introduction. I would like just to take a few seconds to say thank you very much to the Siam Society and to everyone for electing me as an honorary member. It truly is an honor. I am very touched. I'm enormously proud of this. I have got such a lot out of the Siam Society over recent decades that I'm very happy to give a little back, and to get something like this is just then the icing on the cake. Now, Pasuk is, of course, everything we have done, we do together as a team, and this project is also a team project as well. But this evening, I'm going to give the presentation and she will come back and join us later for the Q&A. There's now going to be a little hiccup when I'm going to disappear and I'm going to bring up the PowerPoint and get going. And that little hiccup will just take a couple of seconds. Here we go. Okay, here we go. Okay, so I'm going to get the pointer ready. Right, okay. Right, okay. The murals that are painted in Taiwan are very spectacular. They were expensive to create. They needed quite large patronage. They needed skills and they needed commitment. So their appearance was a historical event. When did that happen and why? What prompted this innovation? That is the theme of the lecture. And to answer why they were painted, we have to look at what they painted, and we have to look at the social background, the historical context, because that is the only evidence that we have. Now, the basic research on these murals was done 50 to 60 years ago by particularly these two gentlemen, Nona Baknam and Santi Leksukum. And what we are talking about today mainly comes from 9 sites, these 9 Wat, and they're all in Siam, and they're all around and close to Ayutthaya. We're not going to talk anything about Lanna or Isan, about the south, and we're going to talk not about the Bangkok period, but we're going to talk about late Ayutthaya. Now, a major problem, though, is about dating any of these sites. There's only one of the mural sites that is dated, and the estimates by experts on the others can vary a lot. Besides, anything that was painted 200 to 300 years ago must have been repaired or repainted possibly several times, and we can never be sure what changed. Now, when did it begin? Of course, there have been pictures inside Thai religious buildings for a long time. We know about the engravings of the Jataka tales in the staircase at Wat Si Chum from Sukhothai in the mid-14th century. We know also about the crypt of Wat Rat Budana, probably from the 1420s, and several other crypts around that area. But these paintings were not made to be seen. They were hidden away in the same way that Buddha images, votive tablets, and precious metals were also hidden away in the crypts and buried under the buildings. They were there in order to enhance the sacredness, the power, if you like, of those buildings. And all I'll note now is that the two main themes in these hidden paintings were the Buddhas of the past and the convocation of the deities, the gathering of various celestial beings to celebrate the Buddha, particularly on the occasion of his enlightenment. Now, foreigners started coming to Siam from the 16th century, and they went to look in the Wat as well, and they were fascinated by them, and they recorded what they saw. And just to give you one example, here is one. Here is Jeremias van Vliet from 1638. He notes that all of them were filled with innumerable idols. They were full of gold, silver, and copper. They were gilded and painted. They had very lovely tiles. They had wooden decorations. They had all kinds of different roof furniture. So they described the Wat and their decoration in great detail. And the other visitors, there were several, and they all tend to be much the same. They talk about the gold, the precious stones, the gilding, the foliage, and so on, okay? But they don't mention seeing any murals, okay? And also Engelbert Kempfert walked around Ayutthaya in 1690 and drew pictures of everything in his notebook, which has survived to this day. And he drew several things inside Wat, including Sema stones and various images and other things, but there's no sign of a mural. Now, these were inquisitive post-Renaissance men. They were interested in Buddhism, because some of them were missionaries and some of them were Jesuits. If these people had seen murals, they would have mentioned them for sure, but they don't, with two exceptions. The first is Simon de la Loubert, who came with the French embassy in 1687. And he said, in one temple, I saw a very nice fresco. Unfortunately, he doesn't say where, and he doesn't say what the fresco depicted. More interesting is Nicolas Gervais from the same period. He said in 6 or 7 old temples on which the kings of Siam have spent immense sums, the walls and the pillars are very neatly painted with quite well-drawn scenes taken from their legends, or showing the joys of paradise and torments of hell, or depicting the monks. Now, we can guess from this that the legends means the Jataka tales. The joys of paradise and torments of hell are for certain is the Draipum, the 3 worlds, the cosmology. And the monks is probably the life of the Buddha with scenes in which the Buddha is in the garb of a monk. So from these reports, we conclude that Wat murals were still very rare in the late 17th century, probably in only a few royal temples. But in this last period of Ayutthaya, the last 100-odd years, they seem to have spread quite widely. They spread not only in the capital and in major Wat, but in rather modest Wat out in the provinces. And as we said, they were expensive, they required patronage and skill, and they were very dramatic. So what did they paint? What, if you like, was the visual vocabulary they were drawing on? Now, of course, there were other forms of painting. In particular, there were paintings on manuscripts for a long time. We don't really know how long. Okay? And particularly in this same period in late Ayutthaya, we see the emergence of these wonderful books called Samutapat Draipum, illustrated manuscripts of the 3 worlds. And these were like compendia of Buddhist teachings in visual form. And they had four main themes. The first of these was the Draipum cosmology, the heavens and hells. The second is the life of the Buddha. The third is the previous lives of the Buddha, the Jataka tales, and particularly the last 10 of those, and the last of the maps of the Buddhist world. Now, these wonderful Sabuttapap Traipum were made for royalty, very sumptuous books, and would have been seen by very, very few people. However, we see the same imagery appearing in the Wat murals, so we can assume that this visual vocabulary was much more widely shared than just. So what did they paint? What, if you like, are the main characteristics of the Ayutthaya era murals? The first is that they treat the whole interior like a single canvas. And as we say, think of this for these artists. They are going from painting these manuscripts where the space they have is a few square centimeters, and they're going to that, from that to painting a whole interior. And you can sense in looking at these spaces, especially the well-preserved ones, how exciting simply that was. And this is what got Gail Sutaram in Petbury, which is one of the oldest, the only one that's dated, one of the most beautiful and intricate, and one of the most studied. And I have to thank particularly Dr. Pichaya Sumjinda from Chiang Mai University for this and some of the other wonderful photos here. Now, this whole design is really very special indeed. Each of the long walls like this is divided by these triangular shapes. And these in yellow are just encasing jedi, stupas, which are dividing up the scenes. Now, on this south wall, it depicts the 8 great sites, meaning 8 great occasions in the life of the Buddha. And they are in these triangular spaces in between. And so, for instance, here, there is one of these, which is the scene of the Enlightenment, okay? And on the opposite wall, it depicts the 7 great places. These are the great places where the Buddha stayed in the 7 weeks after his enlightenment. And this one for here, for instance, depicts the 6th week, and it shows when the Buddha was sheltered by the serpent Mujjalinda. And this whole design is tied together because one of these sequences goes along the wall and ends up on the end wall by the doors. And the other sequence starts on the wall behind the Buddha and goes along the other long wall. So it's integrated both in with this terrific triangular design, this very intricate and rather special style of painting, and the way it is all tied together. Now, apart from treating the whole interior as a single canvas, what is significant is that they're all different. You may know that in the Bangkok era, there is a kind of standard layout. You put the Draipum here, you put the Maravijay here, you put the Jatakas there. But if you go back to these Ayutthaya ones, there's very clearly no standard layout at all. They are all very different. Let's then look at this, which is Wat Prasad in Nonthaburi, and you see it's very elegant Ubosot, and it has, the wall has no windows, the long wall has no windows, giving a lot of space for the painting. And this picture, this photograph was taken 60 years ago by a team headed by Sin Birasi and Pheu Haripitak. And if you go now, you can hardly see anything at all. This is a photo I took 3 or 4 years ago. It has got very badly damaged and very badly deteriorated since this team went there. But luckily, from their photos, we can get an idea of the design. Here is the long wall, and it's divided into 2 registers. In the upper registers along here, we have a frieze of the Buddhas of the past. And here down below, we have 2 of the Jataka. We have Vidura and we have Narada. And there's 5 of these on each wall, showing all 10 of the last 10 Jataka. And they're divided by these absolutely beautiful paintings of votive figures, which is a very unusual design. So that is what each of the walls looks like. Now, there is one color photo that was taken by a team headed by Santi Lexukuma 40 years ago. And we can just get some idea of how exciting this must have been. Each of the frame, this is the Mahosata Jataka, and this shows the attack on Mithila by King Julani. And you can see the Mithila sort of has a walled city in here, and outside here, down here, we have the troops of King Julani on the assault. And to get a little bit closer up, you can see them with, and you get some idea here of how busy this painting is compared to the painting we saw at Wat Gaokao Sutaram, and also the use of many different kinds of colors, which is very fascinating. Another example is Wat Kian in Antong, which is a Wat which until very recently, and the picture on the left, was very badly deteriorated and has been beautifully restored recently. And here again, we have the same basic design. We have friezes up the top, and we have jatakas down below. But here, instead of being divided by the votive figures, they're divided by these jagged sawtooth lines, the sintai. So the basic design is like this, and on one wall it has pretty much all of the last 10 jataka. Okay, but then the surprise comes on the opposite long wall, which is totally devoted to one story, which is the story of Suton Manura, which is an old folk tale that was converted into a jataka in Southeast Asia, not in India. And figures in the collection known as the 50 Jataka. And here you can see on this wall some of the scenes from this. There is the top here is showing the hunter capturing Manura with the Naganus. The second one is showing here the very last scene where Suton is able to identify Manura amongst her sisters, and here is Manura dancing for her mother-in-law. Right, and again, just lastly, here at Wat Chongnong Si in Bangkok, basically the same kind of design, two registers, the Buddhas of the past at the top, the jagged lines below. But if we go a bit to the left, we have something that is really rather different. This is portraying the Vidura Jataka, Withun, okay? And this is showing the scene where the ogre, Panaka, who is riding the horse here, he has managed to win the Bodhisattva in a dice game and is taking him away in the hope of having him killed. But the way the story is told is like a manga or a comic. It's shown in successive scenes going all the way up the wall from the floor to the ceiling. So again, another different way to portray. They're all different. Another characteristic of these murals is they then add elements, I think, just to make the whole thing seem complete. And the things that they add are the Draipum, the Buddhas of the past, the Convocation, and Withayathon. We'll look at them briefly. Here is Wat Changyai in Ayutthaya. And that is one way of showing the Draipum murals, okay? And another much more elegant way you can see here at Wat Gaokao Sutaram in a very, very different style. The Buddhas of the past, again, are portrayed in many different ways. This is Wat Chongnong Si. And here they are divided from one another by a fan, by a talipat here. And here is Wat Gaokao, they're divided by a sort of busabok type thing here. And over the top of each of them, they have a chak, they have an umbrella. And again, here at Wat Kongkaram in Ratburi, they have attendants, they have disciples attending upon them. So they're all rather different in the way they're portrayed. The Convocation of the deities in Wat Yai Suwanaram, which is one of the oldest of these designs. The Convocation of the deities takes up the whole wall. It's the whole design. But more usually in the Wat of these era, it's pushed up to a frieze in the top part of the wall. And this is at what my Prachumpon in the Konluan. And here, each of them is shown with a very beautiful offering of flowers being offered to the Buddha. But elsewhere, for instance, at Wat Kian in Antong, it's much more plainly rendered. Finally, then, let's look at the Withayathon, which are a rather interesting addition. Withyadhara or Withayathon. The word means bearers or holders of wisdom. And it's actually very similar to the word wizard in English. In the Hindu epics where they appear, they're very positive characters. They're doers of good and devoted to joy. But when they get transferred into Buddhism and into Southeast Asia, they change. In the Pali dictionary, they're called sorcerers. And in the 50 Jatakas, in these Jataka that appear in Southeast Asia, they become very mischievous. They're given very much to stealing and to fighting. And here, back at Wat Kian and elsewhere, they're often portrayed in a frieze right under the roof, just below the roof level. And interestingly also, they're portrayed as foreigners. This is obviously a Westerner here, and this is probably a Middle Easterner and various others. But they're also portrayed as doing rather naughty things. He's drinking alcohol, he's cavorting with a woman. This man has a lot of magic paraphernalia and so on. In Phongpaichit in Thonburi, the Persian is portrayed rather normally, but the Farang is portrayed with a rather lovely, voluptuous woman. But sometimes they're not naughty. At what got Gael Sutaram, again, they're portrayed as many different forms of foreigner, but they're flying through the air, but they're not doing anything very naughty. And they're actually portrayed very large in this, and very unusually large in this particular mural. They're an interesting element because they're a rather folkish element that's been brought into this rather purist designs. We also then get some unique or unusual features which appear every now and then. For instance, in Wat Kian, one of the end walls is completely given over to a portrayal of the hymn of Anta Forest with these rather lovely elephants, which are somewhat similar to the elephants that turn up later in Wat Sutat. In Wat Chayatit in Thonburi, there's this cascade of flowers, which probably depicts the flowers which the gods cast down to celebrate some occasion in the life of the Buddha, his birth or his enlightenment or whatever. Okay. And finally, here is again in what my Prachumpon in the Konluan. And you can see here that on this wall, and in fact, much of the murals have almost completely disappeared. But if we look here behind the Buddha, there's a rather lovely Buddha seated under a naga, but it's surrounded by this, the tree of life design, a design which comes from the Middle East, particularly from Persia, and which shows all kinds of flora and fauna that is never found in Southeast Asia. Obviously must have come from the period of Persian influence. So these special features, I think, demonstrates the people who are creating them wanting to be different, wanting to be special, wanting to be distinctive. Finally, what do we not see? What is not there in these murals? First, there are almost no Hindu deities, except in the Convocation of deities. There are no spirits except Mayor Ptolemy. There's almost no supernaturalism or magic, except the miracles of the Buddha. And there's almost, as far as I can see, there's no sign of Prat Malai, this famous monk who went off to visit the heavens and the hells, and whose story was enormously popular in manuscripts in late Ayutthaya. And I think these absences depict a rather purist kind of Buddhist thinking behind the conception of these murals, which is interesting. Now, apart from these scenes, apart from the major themes of the life of the Buddha and the Jataka tales and the other extras put in, what else did they paint? They painted the everyday world around them. And they painted that in two ways. First was the landscape, particularly the cityscape. We know that people of the time thought Ayutthaya was just wonderful. There's poems describing it in very highfalutin terms. The city is excellent. It has everything. It deserves more praise than heaven's high. Just scan your eyes across the world. It is the single celestial flower. And here and this is at what? Konkaran in Ratburi. And it's obviously been repainted, but it's believed that the design goes back to Ayutthaya. But each of the scenes from the life of the Buddha is in a kind of octagonal shape, which is clearly a depiction of Ayutthaya, with the walls, the towers, and particularly the very distinctive Siamese roofscape of palaces and other buildings. And each of these scenes from the life of the Buddha is portrayed in this same way, with this same casing. And the result is the whole interior is absolutely breathtaking. This was the first one that I ever saw, and I remember being swept away completely. Apart from showing these imaginative scapes of Ayutthaya, there's some rather accurate depictions. Now here, which is at Wat Chongnon Si, this is a depiction of the major audience hall in the palace at Ayutthaya. And we can see, if we look back again at Engelbert Kempfer's notebook in 1690, and he peered over the wall and drew the same thing, that it is very clearly the same building being depicted at Wat Chongnon Si. But more than this cityscape, they portrayed the social landscape. If we go back to what got Gail Sutaram and look not at this wall, but the wall that's behind the photographer here on the other side, which looks like that, and look particularly at this little square above the door. This is a scene which some people call the Mahanakon, which I'll explain later, but it shows a kind of social panorama. If we start up here in the top left, what this shows is a king in a palace. Here he is where he has an elaborate crown. He is attended by attendants here and over here. His palace is very clearly surrounded by a kind of water garden with lovely lotuses floating in it. And it has, of course, a very distinctive roofscape up here. On the other side, we have another king. He has a different kind of crown. He also has attendants. And here he has an orchestra. This is a mahori. And between them, in the middle, there's a river or a lake of some sort. And on that, there are royal barges, just like Suvarnabhumi today. They have prows here with animal creatures on them. This is a Garuda on the prow of this royal barge. So this, above this line, is the world of the king. And it's very, very sumptuous indeed. And what runs across the middle of the painting is a wall. And we can see quite clearly that this is the wall of Ayutthaya. It has the same kind of turrets, the same embrasures, which we can still see today, and the same kind of gates, water gates and tunnel gates, which we can see on 17th century painting. And what do we find below this wall, on the space between the wall and the river? First, coming in here, there is a noble. He's being carried on a palanquin. He has his bodywan. He has his attendants behind him, and they're carrying his umbrella, his fan, his beetle box, and his other things. And he's raising his arm here in a gesture which indicates giving a command, being a man of authority. And he's coming in through the gate here to this space here, which is a market. Here we see a lady vendor with a basket from which she's selling. Here there's a man sitting at a stall, and here's another man sitting at a stall and selling something. Here are people coming out of the city through a tunnel gate in order to do their shopping. And here, I think, is someone having a massage. Further along here, there's a gate, a very typical Ayutthaya style gate. And coming out from that gate, there are two soldiers on elephants. Here's the first soldier, an elephant, and the second soldier on an elephant. Further along here, we have a Middle Eastern gentleman or a Persian in a rather elaborate dress, and riding on a very pretty piebald pony. Finally, running along the front of this picture, we have the river, clearly the moat around Ayutthaya. And here to the left, it took me a long time to work this one out, they are washing the king's elephants. And if you can see, this is one elephant and a trunk. This is another elephant, and these people are washing them. Further along in the middle here, we have a scene which, of course, you still see in the water market. Here is a lady vendor, probably selling kanom or sweets, and she has a very nice umbrella over here to keep the sun off. And finally, to the bottom left here, there is another noble. He's in a reganya, he's in a canopy boat with a canopy to keep him from the sun. He's lounging very luxuriously, and he seems to have a lady companion. So here we have this extraordinary panorama of the society of the time, divided into the world of the king and the world of the people, and in the world of the people going all the way from the nobles down to vendors and to foreigners. Now, of course, you have these scenes of everyday life also in murals of the Bangkok era. But if you just isolate these Ayutthaya era sites, you can quickly see that these scenes are much more common in these early ones, much more prominent. They're not sidelined. Sometimes the students of the Bangkok murals call them gak, they call them dregs, things that are sidelined. But in these murals, they're not. And of course, again, they're always different, the way they're portrayed. Again, at Wat Kian. Here, they're used as divider panels. There's a couple of Jataka tales here and here, and these portrayals of everyday life are put there to divide these Jatakas. Part of it shows these people on traveling, probably between cities. They're probably vendors of some kind. But right beside them, there's another group of people who are hunter-gathering. They're digging for yams in the forest. If we go, sometimes they're put on the fringe of the main scene, back in Wat Konkaram in Ratburi. We're very familiar with the Buddhas at the top, scenes of the life of the Buddha below. But what's interesting here is the bit along the bottom. And this has all kinds of scenes of everyday life going all along. Group of people sitting, conversing, having the time of day, buying from a Chinese vendor, making a boat, some kids playing with a horse, some criminals in a kang, in a constraint, a man practicing a musical instrument, and two foreigners having a horse race, and many other things beside. Sometimes these scenes are just simply squeezed into whatever available space there is. Here at Wat Chongnon Si, we have the Buddhas of the past here, and we have a part of a Jataka story here, and squeezed just in here, we have this. We have Mahut sitting on their elephants. These are like your motorcycle taxi drivers at the end of your soy waiting for a ride. But sometimes these scenes of everyday life are inserted right into the main scene of the story. And here in a sequence on the life of the Buddha, this panel in Wat Padu Songtan is showing the cremation of the Buddha. And this is the Meru. But below the Meru, down here, we have a scene which comes straight out of a festival or a Wat festival in late Ayutthaya. It has all kinds of acrobats and conjurers playing here. It has a koan. This is a folk version of a mask play. And here we have a rather alluring dance. And of course, lots of people watching them. In a similar way, at Wat Chayatit in Thonburi, we have here the scene of the birth of the Buddha. Here's Mahamaya holding onto the tree in order to give birth. And she's screened from the outside world by this curtain around here. But below and just outside this curtain, there's a little scene. And the scene looks like this. In the middle, there's a woman who is nursing her child. Next to her, she has a beautiful friend, and a man has arrived to offer her some flowers. Over here, there's an old lady doing some cooking. And here, there's some people making floral water or something like that. Now, interestingly, these people are painted in a rather realistic way, which is very different from the paintings which are in the scenes from the life of the Buddha, which have all the conventions of Thai paintings. They have elaborate headdresses and they have lots of jewelry. But here, they're painted very plainly, and only a few centimeters away, we can see the feet of the attendants at the birth of the Buddha drawn also in this very elaborate way. One other element of these scenes of everyday life is they're often quite humorous and quite bawdy, and this is probably the most famous from Wat Chong Non Si. Now, again, this is the scene from the Vidhura Jataka, and here the ogre is about to take the Bodhisattva away in an attempt to have him killed. But he has allowed him to come home and, as they say, preach to his wife and children. This is quite a pose for preaching. But anyway, let's leave that aside. But it's what's going on around this little scene from the Jataka that is fun. On the bottom left here, there's a man and a woman pounding rice, which of course is a richly symbolic activity. And there's a mischievous boy down here who's about to lasso his testicles, and his friend is giggling, and the people in the neighborhood cover their eyes because they can't look. A little bit further away from here, there's a scene of tangled legs seen through a window, and the neighbors are gathering round in order to look and listen. And a little bit behind that, there's a woman rather déshabillée and also looking rather tired. And if we look just out of shot here off to the right, there's a couple of gentlemen sprawled asleep, looking as if they're sleeping off a rather heavy night. Now, the point about this is there's no way that this is hidden away. If you have gone to what Chong Non Si, as I was lucky enough to do with the Siam Society last year, you have seen that this particular scene is right in the middle of one of the long walls and right at eye height. There's no way that the abbot didn't know about this. There's no way that the elders of the community did not know about this, and so on. This was seen as being perfectly acceptable. It's part of what these paintings are all about. So, why? Why did they start painting these murals in late Ayutthaya? What prompted this large investment and effort in creating these wonderful things? Now, the old history about late Ayutthaya said that there was a decline. There was a decline from the crisis in 1688 down towards the fall of the city in 1767. In other words, there has to be a decline before the fall. But the new story has changed that completely. The new story is that this was Ayutthaya at its most prosperous and its most glorious. And it prospered on increasing trade to China, including selling rice for the first time. And also the wealth was much more widely spread in the society than before, largely because the royal monopolies were relaxed. The result was there was a rich and increasingly confident nobility in this period. And we think that they were the source of the patronage for this painting of what murals. And they probably really liked to patronize these things because they were new and exciting, right? And just, it was a great way to advertise new wealth. But this prosperity in late Ayutthaya had another effect, as prosperity often does. It overturned the social order. It was a time of revolts, many more than in earlier periods, a time of robbery and crime, and a time of corruption. And we can see in laws which were passed in this time, they complain about people who've paid bribes to officials to dismiss good men and appoint them in their place. They then oppress, bully, and cheat to make money to recoup the bribe. Of course, we all recognize this. It goes on today all the time. If someone of no lineage, of low birth, someone's slave or servant, makes money at gambling, bribes his way to become a royal page, he gets carried away and he does this and that. We've all seen these writings by people, particularly from the old elite, complaining that everything has gone to the dogs. And there's one text that says this very well. Some people have gone off to become bandits. Many villages and city folk have been ruined and scattered to the winds. There is nobody to rely on. Those who know only trading fight for what they can get, like crows and vultures. And of course, there's also the long song poetry, the Pleng Yao, which is often attributed to King Narai, but it certainly wasn't. It was written by an 18th century noble. And everything is turned upside down. So the natural order and the social order are both turned upside down. So on the river, the heavy roof tiles bob and drift, they float, while the gourds that should float, they sink. Everything has gone upside down. What we see in these texts is that people are looking to Buddhism to be a tool of social order, to put some discipline and order into a disorderly society. In order for that to take place, first thing that has to be done is Buddhism has to be strengthened. So this entails the building and repairing and beautifying of what? It also entails shifting the teaching away from encouraging people just to make merit, but rather encouraging them to live good lives according to the examples of the Buddha in particularly in his previous lives. The contribution of the Wat murals to this are several. First is they're part of enhancing the sacredness, the power of the Wat. They make them much more attractive to visit. And they also are a way to give teaching on living the good life, the exemplary life. What then about including these scenes of everyday life so prominently in the designs? I think there's a couple of things going on. I think firstly, it's a way of merging Buddhism into the here and now. It's saying, although we know that we have this story about the life of the Buddha, it's not just 2,000 years ago and 2,000 miles away in India. It's here and now. It lives with us today. The same way that making footprints of the Buddha and installing the relics is bringing him and his story much closer, installing him in the locality and in the present day. The second thing I think is going on with these pictures of everyday life is a little bit more complex and tentative. But I think there's some suggestion from what happened to painting in the transition in Europe from medievalism to the Renaissance. Up to the Renaissance, the only things that could be depicted in paintings were religious scenes or royalty. But then there was a change. The first part of the change was to still show a religious scene, but to depict people watching that religious scene from the sides. And that happened by the early 15th century. And not long after that, the Dutch and the Flemish painters started to paint the rich bourgeoisie of the cities. And not far after that, people were also painting the common man and woman at work and at play. And this transition went together with a revision, a revaluation of the nature of humanity, and particularly the relationship between the common man and power, both secular power, meaning the king, and religious power, meaning the God and the church. And I think something like that is going on here in late Ayutthaya. So, to sum up, we think that Wat mural painting began in late 17th century and very quickly spread throughout Siam. But these early sites, they were all different. They clearly were local patronage, local expertise, local inspiration, and they wanted to be different, okay? This movement was associated with this period which had both prosperity and disorder, which gave rise to patronage, but also a movement to mobilize Buddhism for more social discipline. Bringing everyday life into the design was a way to bring Buddhism in the here and now, into the here and now, but maybe also reflects a bigger change in the assertion of human worth. Thank you very much indeed.
Very much, Dr. Chris Baker. Now, may I ask the first question? Why, oh, you can hear me? Yes? Why did you and Dr. Pasuk start to study this in depth?
I think first off, just because we like looking at pretty things, yeah, which I think is quite good enough. But also, you know, we were writing the history of Ayutthaya. And if you look at the way we write the history of Ayutthaya, we use all kinds of different sources. We don't just read the chronicles. We don't just read the foreigners' accounts. We read the laws. We look at the literature. We look at the paintings, because we consider all of these are good ways to understand this society. Okay?
And also because we find that we wanted to write a history from the bottom up as well. We want to show people, the reader, about other segment of societies other than the monarchy and the nobles and the business, and what ordinary people were living and thinking and what were their roles. And we found that we could not find all this in the official records, but we do find it in paintings and local artwork, like mural. We learn a lot from them. Oh, we can't hear you now.
We can't hear you, Tom.
We can't hear you, Tom.
Unmute myself. Okay.
Okay.
I will unmute Kun John to me, please. Ask to unmute. Yes.
Okay. I've unmuted myself. Yes.
Okay. Go ahead.
Is it okay to ask a question?
Yes, please do.
Okay. Chris, congratulations on your election as the honorary member. We're very, very happy about that. And Chris, I'd like to ask you some questions about the Ayutthaya as compared with Ratanakosin murals. In general, can we say that there is more use of red color in Ayutthaya and more blue color in Ratanakosin?
You know, I'm not sure. I mean, I've read what Nona Paknam and Santi have written on pigments. And I think they are perhaps guessing, because some of the designs that we see, particularly when you go and look at what Changyai, which is full of blues and greens and oranges.
Yes, yes.
And if you look at what probably existed before in Nakhon Luang, that also probably had a lot of strong colors. And
yes.
as for Wat Prasad in Nonthaburi, seems to have a whole range of colors. Now,
Yes.
the trouble is, we cannot tell whether these were added later, right? Sometimes it seems pretty obvious that they were. What Konkaram in Ratburi, it's pretty clear it was rather largely repainted in the third or fourth reign, sometime like that, and probably new colors. I find it very difficult to use color as a marker of dating. I think it's very difficult to do that.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. One factor, though, may be the fact that Thailand was not on the Silk Road and didn't have access to so many of the colors that the nations on the Silk Road had. For example, lapis lazuli, from which blue is made. And then later, when Thailand opened up to some more trade, or at least maybe influence from China, perhaps lapis lazuli arrived that way. We had learned things like this in our guiding course at the National Museum volunteers docent training centers. And also I'd done some research myself on that. And taking it just a little bit further about the differences, during Ratanakosin, there was more of a proliferation of murals than there was during Ayutthaya. And I wonder if that was because when the dynasty, the Chakra dynasty first began, they didn't have enough labor. And so they sent forays of military groups into Cambodia and Laos to kidnap the artisans, say, you know, for Cambodian classical dancing, to make Thai classical dancing, same for music. And the painters, there's a story about a Thai Lua temple that was painted by two brothers that had been captured from Laos and had been separated all that time since their kidnapping until the time of painting the Thai Lua temple. I'm sorry, I can't remember the name of that temple. Linda McIntosh took us there to see that a long time ago.
Yes, but I don't think we need to rely on, you know, the kings finding labor. What strikes me from particularly looking at these Ayutthaya ones, certainly, and also many of the Ratanakosin ones, they were clearly very local. You know, they were financed locally. They were very much local inspiration. You know? And we see in what Gokgeo Sutaram, which is one of the few which has an inscription about the people who sponsored, and they're very clearly just local people. You know, they say they come from the village just down the road. So I think this is, there's always a tendency in Thai history to find an explanation which comes from the kings downwards. But I have found very often it's a bit better to look what's coming upwards from the potter.
Do you have other questions? Please raise your hand. Please, Mr. James Wise, I'll unmute you 1 second. Ask to unmute. Wait a second. Wait a second. Ask to unmute. Why it's not right? Ask to unmute. Not ทำไมมันไม่ unmute อ่ะ You have to accept it. You ask us to unmute. Can you wait? Okay, great. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank
you, Chris, for your talk, and congratulations both on the talk and your award. Many of the murals have obviously been lost. Others are gradually disappearing, as you showed in your talk. Would you like to say something about what is being done and what can be done to preserve those that remain?
I mean, I don't actually know that much about restoration work. I mean, what seems to happen is that occasionally a project comes along to focus on a particular what and then do it very well. And Wat Kian in Angkong is a lovely example of what has been done to transform that. But this seems to be really a very haphazard business. I suspect that what really needs to be done is more virtual preservation of these murals. In other words, the capturing of and recreation of these in computer form. And I think some of us have seen wonderful examples of the way this can be done, particularly in Japan. There are some spectacular examples in which the whole interior of a building has been recreated by projecting it onto the walls of a new building. This is, to me, is the way you have to go. Trying to protect these sites whose materials are very prone to decay. It's very difficult indeed. I think it's extremely important to preserve the very best of those that survive today. And that should be done. But to preserve them all is really asking, I think, for too much.
Yeah, thank you.
Mr. Nu, can I speak now? Hello. My question is kind of, I'm looking at your explanation and I'm wondering, there is nowadays a proliferation of statues of non-Buddhist deities in Thailand, constructed by monks or rich people. They seem like the same reaction to changes in society, like what you are explaining. Do you think there is a parallel there?
Yes, I think certainly true. And I think it's a rather good parallel that you have brought up. What we were trying to do in this project is to ask a question, you see, that in many ways the art historians have not asked before. They haven't raised the question. They tend to write about them as if these murals have always been there, you know? So they don't have to ask the question of why they came about. But we are coming at this not so much as art historians as social historians. So we're asking this question about the relationship between what we see in artistic expression and what we see happening in the society. There's always some kind of relationship between the two. I think that's a very good parallel.
Okay, Kun Ek, please hang on.
ครับผม Hi อาจารย์ Chris, thank you so much for the wonderful presentation. I have one question because towards the end you said the expansion of the mural painting, the popularity of painting has spread it out towards the end of Ayutthaya, which seems so contradicting to what we have known before about the deterioration of Ayutthaya towards the end. So this is something, to me, it's very interesting because it's contradicting to what we know and seems to think like that before. Apart from mural painting, have you detected any other kind of spread, something that tells about those new rich of how they spend the money in terms of different type of artistic expressions or anything else that we can look as a reference to apart from the mural painting? It's just to make the picture more solid of, you know, actually it wasn't a decay towards the end of Ayutthaya, but in fact the new splurge of the new rich on doing something else that we should try to identify.
Now, this whole business of the decay is the only place actually where you find this is in the chronicles that were written in the early Bangkok era, which wanted to blame the fall of Ayutthaya on the society, particularly the nobles and the kings of the late Ayutthaya era. Now, this revision of the history is not us. I mean, this is particularly Sunet and people around Ajahn Sunet, and came out with a wonderful book, Awasan, about 6-7 years ago now, which totally revised this. And they concentrated particularly on showing how the Chinese trade was so rising in this time. And Phongpaichit's work, okay, on the pottery shows that there was this one enormous import, a very organized import of Chinese pottery, which indicated a very high demand. If we look at the descriptions of the markets which exist from the very end of the Ayutthaya era, they show the absolute explosion of goods that they see there. We have the record of the Sri Lankan monks who came in Bolomagot in the 1750s, and they described walking down one street in Ayutthaya and they said it was a blaze of splendor, and they described all the things they saw. Immensely rich in this way. Very large numbers of what were built or repaired. I mean, Ajahn Piriyat has said this sometime. He said that the whole roofscape, the whole of Ayutthaya was completely changed by the amount of building in this era. We also know that these rising nobles, what rising nobles always do is imitate royalty, right? And they try to take over things which were previously banned. So what do? They start sponsoring drama troupes, you know, and putting on comb performances. They start having huge funerals and weddings. You know,
Right.
we have examples of all of this going on. It was immensely a rich time. And this is also the time when you get the import of many stories. This is when you have Inao and these stories and Samgok and so on coming into. They're being brought in and reprocessed locally. Okay? So a lot of production. Yeah.
Right. So can we frame this sort of time period of towards the end? Can we say like 18th centuries? That would sound right, right? But not in terms of timing. Where is this period? Towards the end, the last 67 years of 18th centuries.
Yeah. I think what you have to get rid of is the idea that there's any falling off after 1688. The idea there was an isolation and a decline. Because actually all that happened was the French and the English went away. And the French and the English didn't matter. They'd only really been in Ayutthaya for 10 or 15 years. And they didn't do anything very much. They weren't important
right.
at all. The important people were the Chinese, the Persians, and
the Dutch.
The Dutch, but the Dutch were also on the way out. It's the Chinese.
Right.
Particularly in this latter era, Ayutthaya is important in Asian trade rather than in this trade involving the European powers. So it's in this exchange between China and Japan on one side and Arabia and India and Persia on the other. Right? So it remains rich and powerful on this. So I don't think there's any falling off, but it probably gathers from the 1700s, 1710s onwards. There's clear evidence of quite a big immigration of Chinese in this period.
Right. All right. Thank you so much. Thank you.
I think Dr. Pasuk would like to say something. Would you like to say something before we ask Dr. Leedham to ask the question? Ask to unmute. Dr. Pasuk, would you like to say something? Okay, Dr. Leedham Leifert, could you raise your hand and please start.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate your talk. Speaking from the point of view of Northeast Thailand and Laos, where narrative scrolls have been an important part of the relationship between the society, the people, and the religion, and probably the royalty at the same time. I have a number of questions. It was a really exciting talk. And from the other side of the planet where we're just waking up, this was a good way to wake up. I really appreciate that. And I appreciate that it was recorded, and I hope that this talk will be available. Probably you will publish it. I hope so. What my questions are several. Number one, of course, is the whole issue of painting on cloth, and whether indeed you think that there might have been some previous paintings on cloth that would then have been taken and put on the walls. Something on the order of that. Another question has to do with, do you see narration occurring on these walls? The presentations seem to emphasize separate portraits or separate scenes rather than a complex story wending its way across a wall, as you see, for instance, in Wat Banyang in Mahasarkham, in Borobu. Do you find that kind of thing? And this all relates, of course, then to the relationship between the people and the elite, and how the people are involved in what's going on. The interesting thing about the Northeast Thai and Lao scrolls is that the people themselves institute, at least on the Bun Pawait, they are responsible for instigating the ceremony. They are responsible for organizing it, and they indeed are, in the narration of the scroll, are very important in terms of making the story. Can you comment on a number of those several things that have occurred to me as I've been waking up here from this side of the planet? Thank you, sir. Really good talk.
Leedham, thank you very much. The first question is, this is submitted to the Festschrift for Dr. Pirya Greirer, which is currently in preparation. Okay, so I hope it will be published in that way. I I'm sure there were paintings on cloth. There are a couple of mentions of these in the foreigners' accounts, but they're not very extensive, and they just say we saw some paintings on cloth. They don't tell us anything more than that. But I imagine there were, and I imagine that the use of banners of some sort or another was probably quite important. We don't have any real evidence at all about the local social background to the making of these murals. We just have these couple of inscriptions from Phetchaburi, from what got Gael Sutaram, which just tell us the names of the people and nothing much else. So really, in what way people were involved, I think we tend to be guessing somewhat. I think it's very difficult to say anything explicit in that way. But it is striking. I mean, I don't know if you remember the sort of third or fourth of our slides, which shows the 9 temples which we're looking at. They're all rather modest local temples, you know, and this suggests that there must be a very considerable bottom-up local involvement in these. And of course, unfortunately, we cannot really tell what there was in the capital, what there was in Ayutthaya. One of the only ones that survived is Wat Padu Songkham, which of course is off the island and is on the outside, and then small bits and some other ones. So we have very little idea of what there was. Keep doing the good work, Lidam.
Thank you very much for the questions. Do we have any more? I have a couple from myself for both Dr. Chris and Dr. Pasuk. First is the depiction of female in these, you call papgak or drakes or these, you know, like depictions of local scenes and, you know, debauchery. It could be a few other things. The second question is what's related to this? Could they be for the monks to teach the precepts or the Buddhist philosophy using these as allegory or as an example of, you know, bad behaviors?
Go on.
I should think that, actually I hadn't thought very much about that, but I should think that the monks would be very careful about offending the women who are main supporters of these temples. Huh? Don't you think? And what it tells us is that I think that the women in those times probably, I mean ordinary women, probably had a much freer and more at ease situation, yeah? In relation to their relationship with men more than today. Because women are very important as a reproducer of labor, and the death rates for the for the children must be very high at that time. And so female are the precious resource, you know, and they have probably have a lot of the way they can maneuver around and have quite a lot of freedom and some kind of power. You notice how they can walk around everywhere in the market, both being the seller, the buyer, the producer, that sort of thing, which is quite different from some other places around that time in the rest of the world, where women may be kept at home, and it's the men who are walking around in the market more than the women. That's my observation. And you can see how the local artists also had such liberty to show the relationship between men and women in a very open kind of way, right?
I wonder about this argument that somehow it's depicting sin as a way to be instructive. But just because when you look at the way these paintings are done, they don't give that impression. They tend to be more fanciful to me. So I have the impression it's just that they're saying, well, that's life, that's the way things are. And so we as artists, with feeling a compunction to portray the way things are, that's what they draw. Okay? I think there's much more of that involved. Of course, if it was done today, the Ministry of Culture, MinCult, would have had them painted over. Can't hear you, Tom.
Yes, as they say, art imitates life, or life imitates art. Either way. Thank you very much. If there's no more questions, I would like to thank Dr. Chris and Dr. Pasuk Phongpaichit for such a wonderful and beautiful lecture on Zoom for the first time from the Siam Society. We don't have gifts for you that we can send digitally, but hopefully we'll meet in person again one day, and you'll give another talk for the audience here. Thank you very much. We'll end this lecture right here.
Thank you everyone for coming.
Yes,
thank you
yes,
very
thank
much
you very much
for the questions. It was great fun to do. Thank you.
Thank you.
Nice to see you all.
Yes, nice to see you.
Thank you, the members,
Thank you, Tom. Thank you, Tom.
First Zoom lecture. Have a nice evening, everyone. Oh, thank you. There's some reaction here. Okay, great.
Lovely to see you.
Good to see you. We'll send reaction too. Yes.